Welcome everyone to another live stream. And this is When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong. We're going to do a health edition. We're going to highlight the Johnson&Johnson vaccine, all the different stuff that's going on with it, and give you the latest update. And then we're going to talk about some serious subjects, such as getting things in place for when it's time for you to pass on. I know it's a subject a lot of us don't like to discuss, but as we get older, it is important to have things put in place, such as having a will, um, an advance directive. We're going to talk about those things and what happens if you don't have those things in place as well. And then we're also going to talk about how funerals have changed during COVID, how the different practices of social distances play a part, the different aspects as far as hygiene, taking care of those things as well. Okay, we're going to do the disclaimer and get into our first story. Okay, so the first video is going to be about exactly what is the Johnson& Johnson's vaccine in comparison to the other two, which are the Pfizer and the Moderna.
We now have 3 vaccines authorized for emergency use. 2 of them, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, are both messenger RNA vaccines. And then we now have a third one from Janssen, also the Johnson&Johnson company, which is a different format. It is an adenovirus vector vaccine. Adenovirus vaccines are not really new. We have already used them for things like the Ebola vaccine. An adenovirus vaccine is a virus that has been altered so that it can't make you sick, it can't replicate, and it has a special bit of genetic code that has been inserted into it that in this case causes your body to make the spike protein. There are the typical side effects that we see from all vaccines. The injection site can be red, it can be sore. You can have a little fever for 1 to 2 days after. You can feel muscle aches and you can feel tired and a little headache. That's really it. And the nice thing about it is that because it's only 1 dose, the amount of side effects that people have and their severity is very, very small. When we take a second dose of the same vaccine, we tend to have more of an immune reaction and more side effects. So people will actually get fewer side effects cumulatively over the series with this J&J vaccine because it's only 1 dose. What people should know about this is that it is a very effective vaccine. We already had 2 highly effective vaccines on the market, so people try to compare them, but you really can't compare them. They were studied in different places at different times. And the J&J vaccine was studied in places where there were a lot of the new variant strains coming out. But it still showed very high effectiveness, 85%, at preventing severe COVID, and there were no deaths in the vaccine group who received the real vaccine. And that's just phenomenal. People really should take whichever vaccine is available to them. They are all really highly effective. The upside of the J&J vaccine is it's only 1 dose. You need to wait 2 weeks to get the full benefit of the vaccine. Even then, we still have COVID circulating in the community. We don't have widespread immunity yet, so we do still need to practice our masking and social distancing for now.
Okay, guys, now that video that I just showed you, it came out as soon as the Johnson& Johnson vaccine became available. This was before we found out what's really going on with it, and now the issues with the blood clots. Now, This next video is going to show you the beginning when you start seeing the cases come present with people actually becoming sick with the side effects from the Johnson & Johnson.
All 50 states will be halting use of Johnson & Johnson's coronavirus vaccine. The FDA and the CDC recommended a pause Tuesday after 6 women developed blood clots. They reportedly saw symptoms within a week or two of getting the vaccine. The setback has raised questions about the nation's vaccine supply, but President Biden assured there are still enough doses for, quote, every single solitary American. So far, nearly 23% of the population is fully vaccinated, and more than 122 million people have received at least one dose. Jerika Duncan leads off our coverage from New York City.
Tonight, pressing pause. Americans are being turned away from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Some offered Pfizer or Moderna instead after the stunning announcement that 6 women developed a rare blood clot in the brain after getting the vaccine.
This is a recommendation, and it's not a mandate. It's out of an abundance of caution.
Within hours, one by one, every state followed the doctor's orders. But even with millions of doses now on hold,
the J&J vaccine makes up less than 5% of the more than 190 million recorded shots in arms in the United States to date.
The women affected also had low levels of blood platelets. Their symptoms began 6 to 13 days after they got the shot. One woman died, another is in critical condition. And there's a striking similarity. All were of childbearing age. The FDA says they do not see a link between clotting and oral contraceptives.
The women who developed this disorder, this rare disorder, were between the ages of 18 to 48. What does that tell you?
There may be something related to hormones. We just don't understand it enough yet.
Sabra Klein with Johns Hopkins studies the different ways men and women respond to vaccines.
These types of events should be a call that we need to be comparing the responses and the outcomes between men and women.
Health officials say people who have received the J&J vaccine in the last 3 weeks should look out for symptoms like shortness of breath, abdominal pain, severe headaches, and leg pain. It could be a sign of a more serious problem.
One shot and one shot only.
More than 7 million Americans have received the J&J vaccine. About 10 million more doses are circulating throughout the country. Last month, J&J suffered another blow when 15 million vaccine doses were ruined after being contaminated at a Baltimore manufacturing plant.
What are the chances that this vaccine is removed altogether?
Oh, I think that's very, very unlikely. I mean, this is a very safe and effective vaccine. The chances that we'll remove this, I think, is extraordinarily low, and I don't think it would be warranted based on the data we have.
And we're learning that one of those 6 women is from Virginia. She died after suffering a stroke-like syndrome less than 2 weeks after receiving that J&J vaccination. Meanwhile, Pfizer says it plans to ramp up production and can deliver more doses sooner than expected. Elaine?
Jerika Duncan, thank you. For more, let's bring in Dr. Tyson Bell. He's a critical care and infectious disease physician and the medical ICU director at the University of Virginia. Dr. Bell, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. As we've reported, all states are pausing Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. It follows 6 cases of a, quote, rare and severe type of blood clot. What more can you tell us about this complication? How serious is it?
Well, as you noted, it could potentially be fatal. There's one person who has unfortunately died of the complication, but fortunately it is very rare. 6 cases out of almost 7 million that have been vaccinated, so we're talking around 1 in a million. But what's important and why I agree with the decision to go ahead and pause is that we do treat this differently than usual blood clots. For normal blood clots, we usually use heparin products in the hospital. But this could potentially make this specific kind of blood clot worse. And so it's important to get that information out. I also think it's important to pause and make sure that we can collect all the data that we can learn as much as we can about the rare complication. We know that 6 cases in women so far. There could be more, and it could be in different kinds of patients. And then third, ultimately, we need to make sure that speed and equity are also important, but we need to ensure safety as well. the safety reporting system the CDC established worked exactly the way that it was supposed to. And what this does is ultimately ensure that we're making sure that the vaccine is safe, effective, and we can have vaccine confidence because we're making sure that we're following the science and making sure that we're following up on these signals.
Well, doctor, should people who have already gotten the vaccine be concerned?
Well, I would say if you've received the vaccine, just remember that the numbers are on your side. There have been millions of people who have received the Johnson&Johnson vaccine, and you can count on two hands the number of people who have had this rare complication. So there should be some assurance there. But as noted, if you're within 3 weeks of getting the vaccination and you have severe headaches, severe shortness of breath, leg swelling, or abdominal pain, that's something to alert your healthcare provider for and to get checked out.
Well, how could this Johnson&Johnson setback impact U.S. vaccination efforts overall?
Well, Johnson&Johnson, we're planning on getting 100 million doses out by the end of May, and this certainly impacts that effort. When you talk to officials at the White House, they do indicate that this doesn't put a big damper on their efforts so far. There have been 180 million doses of Pfizer and Moderna so far, and Johnson&Johnson made up less than 5% of that. And there are enough Pfizer and Moderna vaccine doses to cover 300,000 or 300 million Americans, rather. So, from that standpoint, we do have enough vaccine to make it there, even if the Johnson&Johnson is turned down. I don't think that it'll completely be pulled from authorization, but it might change in specific populations that ultimately may get the vaccine versus others.
Well, the U.S. has been working to overcome vaccine hesitancy. What would you advise people who are on the fence after learning about these rare side effects?
Well, I do think that's important to have transparency and to make sure that people know when there are these rare side effects. But it's important to recognize the risks of not getting vaccinated as well, too. Over 500,000 Americans have died of COVID-19. We know that long COVID and long-term sequelae can be a problem with COVID-19. And by and large, these vaccines, all three of them, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson&Johnson, the ones authorized in the U.S., are very protective against death from COVID-19 and hospitalization from COVID-19. And so if you look on one hand, these rare side effects that really are the 1 in a million or so, versus that benefit of protection from COVID-19, the overall benefit is towards getting vaccinated and protecting yourself.
Well, infections in the U.S. are climbing, and some experts are worried that the alarming outbreak in Michigan could be a warning sign for the rest of the U.S. Can other states avoid a similar surge?
Yes. Well, the situation in Michigan is concerning. Their cases and hospitalizations have gone up around fourfold over the past 2 weeks. And there have been discussions about the way to get out of it. And vaccinations and getting vaccinations to the state has been discussed. But I think the most important measure at this point is to institute a lockdown and to make sure that we stick with public health measures that we know contain the spread of the virus. This can be a harbinger for what could come in other states. And so I think it's a good signal to others to make sure that we keep our diligence up. In the midst of trying to vaccinate as many people as possible, it's important to know that the vaccine is still here, very active. The variants have been a concern, particularly B117 in Michigan and other parts of the country. And so we just have to be extra vigilant when it comes to doing what we can to prevent the spread of the virus.
Such a critical message. Dr. Tyson Bell, doctor, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, and now we're going to move into this next video clip, and it's a question and answer. So if you're still having questions and concerns about which vaccine you may be interested in getting, and you just are hesitant about what comes along with it as far as side effects are concerned, that's why I decided to choose this video. So listen to it, and hopefully it'll give you the peace of mind that you need. My advice to anybody who's looking to vaccinate is educate yourself, research for yourself. Do not rely on information from third and fourth parties. Research it for yourself. And that way you'll feel confident when you make whatever decision, whether you decide to or not.
We are back with our series Vaccinating America, and this morning we're bringing your questions about COVID vaccines to our very own expert.
Yeah, we need some expertise this morning. A lot of questions out there. Dr. John Torres is NBC's senior medical correspondent and the author of the new book, Dr. Disaster's Guide to Surviving Everything. Dr. Torres, good morning.
Great to see you, Dr. Torres. So let's
morning.
start off
How are you
with
guys
our.
doing?
We're good. Let's start off with our first question from Kendra in Georgia. Here's what she asks: should people be concerned about Pfizer and Moderna? What's the difference between them and J&J?
And I'll reverse the answers a little bit here to explain the differences first. Now, these are two vaccines that do the same thing. They deliver the instructions to your body to help build the immune system so it can fight off the virus. The main difference is Pfizer and Moderna use an mRNA technique, a newer technique. Johnson&Johnson uses what's called an adenovirus technique. And so it's just a little bit older, but they all do the same thing. The main point to remember is all three of these are very safe and very effective. You've heard about the Johnson&Johnson and the blood clots associated with that. Remember, there are only 6 out of almost 7 million people that were vaccinated, so that's less than 1 in a million, even if there is a connection, and they're certainly looking into that right now.
All right, Dr. Torres, Richard and Virginia from Ohio, they asked the following: for those who have already received the J&J vaccine, what should they watch for?
And there are a lot of people that are concerned about that. And the main thing to remember, again, is not to worry too much because these are safe vaccines. But if you did get the Johnson&Johnson vaccine, the FDA put out some information saying that you and your doctor should be looking for these different symptoms within 3 weeks of getting the vaccine: severe headaches, abdominal pain, leg pain, and shortness of breath. After a 3-week time period, you don't really have to worry about it. The chances of something happen are so low, and they're equal across all 3 vaccines. So again, those are the 4 things to look for.
All right, let's go big picture now with Tassos and Maria from New Jersey. They ask, when will we reach herd immunity, and why is that so important?
Well, herd immunity is important because once we get to that level, everybody is protected, even if they didn't get the vaccine. But it's going to take a high level to get that. We're not even close right now. 70% to higher. By some estimates, 90%. But most people are saying 70 to 85% to get herd immunity. Hopefully, we start reaching that around summer time frame, maybe midsummer, maybe even the end of the summer. And by all hopes, we can start getting back to a more normal life in the fall time frame. But that depends on people getting vaccinated. The more they get vaccinated, the quicker we get there.
Dr. Torres, Denise from Georgia asks, what's the latest on vaccinating kids?
So right now, the Pfizer has just ended a study, or they're about to end a study on 12 to 15-year-olds, and they're going to submit to an amendment for their emergency use authorization. That amendment doesn't take nearly as long as the emergency use authorization, so they're hoping they can get that done in May with shots in arms in May and June time frame. For younger children, we're looking late 2021, early 2022, because those studies are ongoing right now, and they are going to take a little bit of time.
All right, a lot of parents watching that piece of it very closely. Dr. Torres, great information as always. Great to see you. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for.
Okay, guys, now we're going to move on. Now we've discussed exactly what the Johnson&Johnson vaccination entails, all the ingredients, how it works in helping to fight the COVID-19. Now we're going to look at some people who actually taken the vaccinations and had adverse side effects. Okay, guys, and here's another story. Shout out to the New York Post for posting those stories. Like I said, we heard about the women, but like I said, that was the first time I heard about a man actually taking the injection and having very horrible side effects. I mean, he has paralysis. This is so real. That's why I said educating yourself is key. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears. We're going to leave from that side, and we're going to get into the talk of funerals and how they've changed during the pandemic and things that you need to have in place when it's time for you to pass away.
I know it hurts, it stings. Yes, we are crying. We can't even hug each other. We can't even embrace how we want to embrace. It's going to be hard this year.
At the Iglesia Baptiste du Calvaire in Adelphi, Maryland, the family of Eric Debouche gathered to pray for their beloved uncle, father, and husband, who died in early April from complications due to the coronavirus. Nadia, his wife of more than 30 years, sang one of their favorite songs in Haitian Creole.
We didn't know he had the virus until the hospital said he had it.
So when we heard news that, he had COVID-19, it wasn't until he was actually complaining about he had a fever and he just wasn't feeling like himself, didn't want to move out of the bed. And so finally, he was having issues with breathing. So my mother took him to the hospital.
And even the last few words he said to me before entering the emergency room. He looked at me and said, "We will not win this battle this time."
Friends and relatives waited in their cars to pay their respects, abiding by the cemetery's social distancing restrictions. These restrictions in place to protect the families of those who have passed, as well as workers at cemeteries and funeral homes. The coronavirus brings additional challenges to a job that, even under normal circumstances, can be trying.
It's difficult. It's one of the hardest moments that I have during the service process. Usually at a funeral, if you have an open casket, the family want to touch the hand of the deceased or kiss them on the cheek. They're letting out a lot of emotions and they're doing what they normally would do. Now, if we have a person who passed away with COVID-19, as a funeral provider, we actually do tell them, hey, because of the situation, we want to make sure you're safe.
Manushka and Daniel Payne own Precious Memories Funeral Service in Washington, D.C.
We've been really busy lately. Our call volume has tripled probably in the last month, but we've gotten a number of calls from families who have lost loved ones of COVID-19.
That means taking extra precautions around COVID-19 victims. But shortages in personal protective equipment means they're risking their health.
We have a shortage of gloves. We have a shortage of body bags. Aprons. There are a number of things that we're in constant need of every day, and we don't know who to turn to right now. We've tried our local government, we tried some vendors in our area, and everyone has a shortage of PPEs now.
At the Fort Lincoln Funeral Home in Brentwood, Maryland, near the D.C. border, Katrina Smith says her usual vendors have run out of many of the supplies she needs.
Lysol spray, Clorox wipes. Some of the masks, the N95 masks, are a hot commodity right now, so those have been a bit challenging to get. We did reach out to the Prince George's County Health Department, and they didn't have any extra supplies for funeral homes.
For now, Smith is trying to make things work by getting supplies from her partner firms across the country. Her stress, like other funeral home directors, is compounded by her inability to care for her clients like she used to.
This is scary. This is scary for all of us. And I would say to anyone that's not taking it seriously that they need to take a harsh look at what's going on around them.
It's very difficult. We take it home every night. There's many nights in the last 2 weeks that I've cried because we can't accommodate families in the norm that they're used to in bringing closure to their families.
I've been looking for body bags for about 3 months. Can't find body bags because they're saying that we're not first responders, so we're not first on the list to get that equipment.
Carol Williams is working nonstop these days.
I am the executive director for the National Funeral Directors and Morticians Association. I watched the news this morning. It is over 157,000 deaths, and each one of those deaths have gone through a funeral home of a crematorium. You have some funeral homes that they're turning families down simply because they do not have the space. Families call you, they're very devastated. I don't have anywhere for my mother to go. And it's very stressful because I can't help you. In some cases, their family members were buried somewhere where they don't want them to be simply because there was no room for them at any funeral home.
Carol says many are forced to cremate their loved ones even if they wanted a burial, just to save space.
It's just devastating.
And beyond the constantly ringing phone, the helplessness is the fear.
I think society forget that when we're dealing with a disease, a virus, that virus is still alive and that person dies. So we still have to make sure that we're protected so we can't get the disease. We need the same PPE that they use in the hospital. Funeral directors need the same thing. We need the mask, we need the face shield, we need the shoe cover. As last responders, because we're the last to get the PPE, we can't get the disinfectants like we need.
So what do you do in the meantime?
Pray and do the best we can. It has really been horrific, but you can't stop. You have to be there.
Now to Illinois, where the rise in both coronavirus cases and deaths caused by it have funeral homes working around the clock to keep up with requests for services. But enforcing regulations, social distancing, and restrictions stemming from the virus is making the grieving process much more difficult for mourners. NBC's Cal Perry spoke to a funeral home director in Chicago, and he joins us now. Cal, along with so many things, this is this tragic reality parallel to the coronavirus that is just something that is so tough for us to need to be talking about. What did you learn?
Absolutely. And this funeral home, Leak & Sons, is actually Black-owned. It has been for 3 generations. And we've talked so much about how communities of color are adversely impacted. As you said, a wave of requests for funeral services. We talked to them about all the changes they've made, from increasing capacity to trying to get mourners to socially distance. And as you alluded to, impossible to imagine socially distancing at a funeral when you're trying to grieve.
It's very scary. I've never witnessed anything like this. You know, when I was little, I always wanted to say that, I wanted to be one of the most well-known funeral homes in the country, following in the footsteps of my grandfather and my father. I didn't want us to get the business like we're getting it now.
Spencer Leak Jr. is a different kind of frontline worker in hard-hit Illinois.
We see on the news that the death rate is rising. I'm looking in our computer system. I'm seeing the names, and I know who died of COVID and who did not, and I see a lot of COVID on the files.
You're seeing a second wave now.
We're seeing that second wave. I'd be here all day, get here like 9 o'clock in the morning. I wouldn't get home at 10 at night. My wife is at the door with Lysol spraying me. I can't go in the room where she is. I'm not hugging my kids.
To keep up with funeral demand, he's buying new hearses and added storage.
We went from being able to hold like 40 remains in our cooler system to like 120. And I need more space right now.
And has been forced to take unthinkable measures, limiting the number of loved ones gathering to grieve.
So we've hired security guards. They're standing out front of the funeral home like we're a nightclub or something, trying to regulate the people coming in.
Somebody's going off behind you to be buried, and there are still folks who don't believe this is real.
If they just come spend a day with me, and they will not believe that anymore.
Savannah, like all frontline workers, the fear of getting sick or taking the virus home is ever present. Mr. Leak told me that he's now wearing a mask in the house.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks.
Okay, guys, what do you think about that? I mean, the pandemic has really, things are new normal. I feel like we're going to be wearing masks for a while. I think just because the vaccines are out does not mean that like this time next year, we're going to be walking around with no mask on. I think that this is very real for those who don't think it is real. And I think, being head of your household or discussing it with your spouse and deciding what is best for your family is very, very imperative right now, because this is not getting better. This is getting worse. So, but I wanted to touch on making sure you have things in place when the time comes. We're getting older. And I often wonder, and I experienced this personally with my own family. I lost my father many years ago, and he didn't have a will. And when I tell you, when they say funerals bring out the best and the worst in your family, I saw some of the worst. I had siblings acting a fool. The day after Dad died, I had siblings come in the house, rummaging through Dad's belongings, taking his jewelry. My father had a gun collection. They were taking guns out the house. And I'm looking at my mom, and she was just so, we're all in shock and grieving. And then you have those family members. One of his sisters came over to the house, going through the jewelry box. And we're looking at each other like, really? Really? But it's like death will bring that out of you, So have things in place. It's imperative. Do you have life insurance right now? Do you have burial insurance right now? If you're married, do you have coverage for you and your spouse? If you have children, are they insured? Nobody likes to think about death or talk about it, but as surely as we take our first breath, we're going to take our last breath. So having these things in place is important. Getting a will is important. So what I wanted to do was, this last video is going to discuss what happens when you don't have those things in place.
What happens if a person dies without a will? If someone dies without leaving a valid will, the person is said to have died intestate. That's legalese for without a will. The property she held in her own name as his or her own separate property passes to the person or persons specified in the laws of the deceased's state of residence after any bills and taxes are taken care of. The property she held in a trust, a retirement plan, or life insurance, or owned jointly with someone else passes directly to the named beneficiaries or other joint owners. Each state has its own unique laws of intestate distribution. And although they're all a bit different, generally, the property of an unmarried person goes to her children, if any, and if not, to her parents. For married individuals, a portion of the deceased's own property typically goes to the spouse, and a portion to the children, if any, or to the parents. If there's no spouse, no children, and no surviving parents, it goes to the brothers and sisters of the deceased, if any, and if not, it goes to even more distant relatives, in the order that is specified and applied in a rather mechanical way under the intestate succession law of your state of residence. By the way, you may have heard that if there is no will, the state gets to keep all the money. That's not the case, except when the deceased has no reasonably close blood relatives, when the family tree is virtually bare. It's rare, but it can happen. If you die without a will, who would handle the rather heavy administrative work of gathering up the deceased's assets, selling some to be able to pay the bills and taxes, and then distributing the balance to the proper beneficiaries? The probate court where the deceased resided typically appoints a beneficiary or relative to serve as the administrator or personal representative of the estate to do just that. And then the court supervises to make sure the administrator does what he or she is supposed to do. Although the system can work when someone dies without a will, preparing a will is a wise thing, as it allows you to choose which relatives and friends and charities should get your assets, and in what proportion, rather than using a fixed distribution list that the state legislature decided on decades ago. Having a will also makes handling your estate much easier on the survivors and far less expensive and faster. There's lots more information on this and 100 other legal topics on freeadvice.com, with additional videos, easy to understand lawyer-prepared articles and FAQs. The free.
Thank you, freeadvice.com. All right, guys, we're going to close out. If you did not watch this live stream from the beginning, please go back and rewatch it. It's so educational, talking about the Johnson&Johnson vaccine, just learning, researching. I cannot emphasize it enough. Research for yourself. It could be the difference in between your life and your death. All right, tune in tomorrow night where we'll be doing Unsolved Missing and a Broken Justice System. Have a blessed rest of your morning.